Racist woman calls 911 on black boy for selling lemonade. The sound of screeching tires tore through the quiet suburban street, interrupting what had begun as a warm, lazy Saturday afternoon. People peered out of their windows with startled curiosity, some stepping onto their porches to see what was happening. The frantic noise belonged to a beige sedan that raced up the street, skidding to a rough stop at the corner, where a small, makeshift lemonade stand stood. A boy barely 10 years old had been stacking cups and ice on a little table, bright poster boards proclaiming lemonade, 50, taped to its edges. He froze in place as soon as he saw the car skid to a halt. Nobody quite knew what was going on, but the tension that hummed in the air carried enough weight to suffocate the gentle, summery mood that had been present just minutes ago. Joshua, often called Josh by those who knew him best, stood behind his little folding table with wide eyes. A few neighbors looked on from behind parted blinds, murmuring questions to one another without daring to step outside. This was the suburbs, after all, a place of well-trimmed lawns, wooden fences, and weekend barbecues, a place people commonly believed to be safe, yet safety felt suddenly in question because something in the abrupt, almost aggressive arrival of that sedan felt like a storm had descended. Josh was only a child, but even he could sense the hostility radiating from the driver's seat. His heart began thumping in his chest. The sign he'd made with so much excitement fluttered in a soft breeze, as though it too felt the coming trouble. Before the car door even opened, the woman inside was shouting. Her voice, shrill and high-pitched, rattled the midday stillness. She slammed the door and marched out onto the curb. Her name was known in this neighborhood for her carefully coiffed hair, her meticulously put-together outfits that often looked like she spent hours coordinating them, and her perpetual scowl. She had never seemed particularly friendly to the other residents, just aloof, standoffish, and always quick to complain when a neighbor's grass grew too tall or a car was parked slightly off the curb. Today, however, her usual brand of prissiness was mingled with a visible anger that made the few bystanders immediately uneasy. Eyes found Josh as if he were a criminal she had been hunting for days. The air seemed to quiver with tension. Josh felt a wave of chills run across his arms despite the summer sun. He had started this lemonade stand as a little weekend endeavor to save money for a new basketball. His mother had suggested he practice a bit of entrepreneurship, and she had found him a folding table from the garage. He'd painted bright, inviting letters on neon poster boards, hoping to attract passing joggers, dog walkers, or neighbors who might want a refreshing drink. For the first couple of hours, it had gone well. A few people stopped by, tossing him quarters or dollar bills and praising his enterprising spirit. That was, until the roar of sedan appeared at the end of the block like an ominous herald. The moment she stepped out of her car, slamming the door shut with unnecessary force, the street fell silent. Even the birds seemed to suspend their song. She wore large, reflective sunglasses perched on the tip of her nose, their tinted lenses failing to hide her narrowed eyes. Her posture was rigid, tense arms, stiff shoulders, every muscle coiled as if ready for confrontation. She walked toward Josh with an air of righteousness, letting each clack of her high-heeled shoes on the sidewalk amplify her furious energy. If any of the neighbors had been uncertain about her intention, one look at her face clarified everything. This was not just a complaint about property lines or noise ordinances. There was something more insidious in her glare. Something that made Josh's small fists tighten reflexively, and an uneasy prickle snake through the spines of anyone watching. "Hey," she barked, waving a manicured hand in the air as if summoning a disobedient puppy. "You, boy. What do you think you're doing here?" She gestured aggressively toward the table, the bright sign, the plastic cups. The question seemed so bizarrely obvious that, for a moment, Josh couldn't form a response. He glanced down at the pitcher of lemonade, the stack of plastic cups, and the cheerful sign. Surely it was plain as day that he was running a lemonade stand. Despite his anxiety, part of him wanted to chuckle at the stupidity of the question, but the anger in her voice frightened him. It was the sort of fury that children instinctively recognize as dangerous. I'm selling lemonade," Josh finally managed, his voice trembling. He dared to stand a bit, forcing himself to swallow the lump in his throat. After all, he wasn't doing anything wrong. Lots of kids set up lemonade stands in the summer. It wasn't a crime. He was simply trying to earn a few dollars. He looked up at who towered over him. Her face twisted in a sneer that sent a pang of dread through his chest. "Where's your permit?" she demanded, glancing around as though expecting city officials to leap out of the bushes to support her. You can't just set up shop on a public sidewalk. You're causing a nuisance. You're probably not sanitary. People could get sick. It's illegal. Her tirade escalated in volume, each accusation harsher than the last, each condemnation stoked by a vitriol that didn't match the trifling situation of a lemonade stand. I don't know why your parents think this is acceptable, but it sure isn't. Where are they anyway? The question stabbed at Josh's heart. His mother, Caroline, was inside the house around the corner, checking on his baby sister. Josh didn't want to bother her with something that seemed so trivial at first, but the undercurrent of hatred in his voice rattled him. He thought about how his parents always taught him to be respectful, polite, not to speak back, especially when confronted by someone who seemed to be looking for a fight. Yet he also felt the creeping sense of injustice. Could he not stand up for himself at least a little bit? "I'm not doing anything wrong," Josh protested softly, gripping the edges of his table. "It's just lemonade. People do this all the time. I'm just here." "That's enough," snapped, cutting him off. She whipped out her phone, her expression set in that of unwavering determination, as though she were about to document a crime scene. Her finger hovered over the screen, and she uttered a chilling threat. "If you don't pack up and move along, I'm calling the police. Right now." At that, Josh felt something crack inside him. Never before had he considered that police could possibly be summoned for such a harmless pastime. He felt the burn of tears at the corners of his eyes, not just from fear, but from sheer confusion and hurt. He had seen other kids in different neighborhoods, selling lemonade, smiling, carefree children who were praised by grown-ups for their initiative. It was a normal, almost quintessential summertime activity. Was it because he was a black boy in this suburban neighborhood? He felt the injustice clawing at him, although he was too young to fully comprehend how racism weaves through so many layers of society. Still, it was there, creeping up on him, intangible but undeniably real. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Several neighbors now stepped outside, Mr. from 3 houses down. Miss, an older lady who often spent her afternoons rocking in a porch chair. Even the new couple, and Roger, whose faces were still unfamiliar to most of the block, peered from their driveway. The tension and raised voices had become a spectacle, something that drew everyone's attention despite the natural inclination to mind their own business. They could all sense something was off, some note of ugliness that extended beyond a mere dispute about permits. But no one intervened immediately. They seemed stunned, unsure of how to react, seized the moment to glare at everyone. "Is nobody going to do something about this?" she demanded, voice pitched high. She gestured at Josh as though he were a piece of trash that had drifted onto her otherwise spotless block. "He's out here, illegally selling drinks, contaminating our neighborhood. We've got the right to protect ourselves from anything unsanitary. Who knows what kind of germs he's spreading." Josh inhaled sharply. He felt tears threatening to tumble down his cheeks, but he blinked them back. He refused to let her see him cry. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him break down. Even though his hands trembled, he clenched them, trying to ground himself. A neighbor, Mr. stepped forward cautiously. He was a tall man with warm eyes, the sort of person who waved hello to everyone in the mornings. There was a hint of hesitation in his demeanor, as though he was weighing the consequences of getting involved. Eventually, compassion overrode caution, and he cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he began politely, "Josh is just a kid. He's not hurting anybody. Why not let him be? People around here would buy lemonade from any kids, you know." His face contorted into an expression of pure outrage. "You want to encourage him to operate illegally." She spat back, raising her phone. "I'll call the cops. They can settle this. I have every right to call in a suspicious, unpermitted vendor in my neighborhood." His expression flickered with concern. He understood all too well the subtext behind her threats, especially how quickly a situation could escalate when police were involved, particularly for a black child. He looked over at Josh, trying to communicate reassurance with his eyes, but was already punching numbers on her phone, her nails tapping the screen with vicious finality. An uneasy murmur rose among the neighbors, but no one dared to yank the phone out of her hand. She pressed the device to her ear. "Yes, there's a boy here," she said into the phone, her voice shifting into a performance of exaggerated exasperation. "He's selling things illegally. I don't see any permit. He's just out here in the middle of the sidewalk, and he's being very rude. Yes, I feel threatened. Yes, right now. She paused, glaring at Josh with a cold, appraising look. He's African American, she added, her tone dripping with a disdain she didn't even try to hide. Those words, while on the surface merely descriptive, held a venomous power, an accusation in themselves. The effect was immediate. A wave of horror rippled through the onlookers as they realized precisely the narrative was trying to construct. The coded language, the insinuation of threat, these things carried a weight that could crush a young life in an instant. Josh stood there, still rooted to the ground. His heart hammered so hard in his chest that he felt dizzy. He wanted to run. He imagined sprinting back to his house, slamming the door shut, and hiding under his bed until this entire nightmare evaporated. But for some reason, he stayed. Maybe it was stubbornness or pride. Maybe it was the flicker of encouragement he glimpsed in Mistress' eyes. Maybe it was the memory of his mother telling him that he had every right to stand up for himself, that he was worth just as much as any other kid. He didn't want to cede his little stand, his sign, his small dream of a new basketball, to the hateful hiss of this woman's anger. So he stood, adrenaline surging through his body, trying not to shake. Finished giving details to the operator, emphasizing how threatened she felt. She snapped off her phone and turned to Josh triumphantly, as though she had just conquered a battlefield. "They're on their way," she announced. "We'll see how you like it when the police arrive." Her lips curled into a smug grin. The hot summer sun glinted off her sunglasses, reflecting her sneer into a warped, devilish shape. The neighbors continued to watch, some stunned into silence, others slowly stepping toward Josh, as though forming a protective circle. Miss Silver-haired and gentle-faced mustered the courage to call out, "He's just a child, for heaven's sake." But she said it so softly that pretended not to hear. Seconds later, the door to Josh's house opened. Caroline, his mother, appeared in a rush, cradling her infant daughter in one arm. She looked around in confusion and alarm, evidently drawn by the shouting. When her eyes landed on Josh's small stand and furious posture, she hurried toward them. "Josh, honey, what's going on?" she asked, scanning her son's face for signs of distress. The moment she saw the tears he was fighting to hold back, maternal rage flared in her eyes. At the sight of Caroline, sneer hardened further. The baby in Caroline's arms began to whimper, sensing the tension. "Your son is illegally selling lemonade," declared, rolling her eyes. "I've already called the police because this is unacceptable. And if you have any concern for your family's well-being, you'll pack up that filthy stand and go back inside." Caroline's face paled, but her voice remained steady. "You called the police on a 10-year-old for selling lemonade?" She asked the question quietly, her disbelief raw. She pulled Josh close to her side. He exhaled shakily, feeling a bit safer under her protective arm. The baby continued to squirm, unsettled by the hostility in the air. "That's exactly right," snapped, crossing her arms. "He's violating city ordinances, using this sidewalk like his own personal storefront, and some of us," her gaze fell pointedly on Josh's dark skin, "don't appreciate unauthorized vendors lurking around." A tremor of fury flashed across Caroline's face. She noticed how was practically spitting the words "some of us," as though speaking for the entire neighborhood. Caroline took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. Josh looked up at his mother and saw the determination in her eyes. She wasn't going to let the intimidation stand, not without a fight. In the distance, the rising wail of a police siren shattered the stillness of the afternoon. People's heads whipped around to watch the approaching patrol car. The neighbors who had hoped this could be resolved peacefully now braced themselves for whatever might come next. Caroline's grip on Josh's shoulder tightened. Josh thought he could hear his own heartbeat echo in his ears, each thud amplified by the swirling dread in his gut. The squad car pulled up slowly, as if sensing the neighborhood tension. 2 officers emerged. A woman with her hair pulled into a tight bun, and a man with a trimmed mustache. Both wore the stiff expressions of professionals who had been called to the scene of a dispute and weren't sure what to expect. Wasted no time, rushing to them with frantic, theatrical gestures. "Officers," she called, painting herself as the victim the moment they stepped onto the sidewalk. "Thank goodness you're here. This child was out here on the sidewalk, screaming at me, refusing to leave when I asked him. He's got an unlicensed stand and it's blocking the sidewalk. I don't feel safe. I asked him nicely to stop, but he was rude." She pointed at Josh as though he were some dangerous delinquent. The officers glanced at Josh's table, at the sign that said lemonade, 50, and then at the boy himself, trembling beside his mother. The female officer's eyes flickered with uncertainty. She turned to, "Ma'am, can you clarify exactly how this child was threatening you?" she asked in a measured tone. His lips parted in mock incredulity. He refused to leave. "He told me it's his right to be here. I felt like he might attack me if I insisted, and you can see he's operating this stand illegally." Her voice wavered, as though teetering on the edge of hysterics. Josh stared at the woman, baffled by her barefaced lies. He had never once raised his voice at her. His mother, with anger simmering beneath her calm exterior, quickly interjected, "Officers, my son was just trying to sell lemonade. We didn't realize there would be an issue. He's done nothing wrong." Caroline's voice trembled slightly, not out of uncertainty, but because of the emotional weight that clung to every word. The male officer spoke next. "We received a report of a suspicious individual, potentially harassing a resident. He sounded tired, as though this call wasn't at all what he expected or needed today. We'd like to hear both sides of the story." At that, Mr. stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Officers, I saw the whole thing. Josh was just minding his own business, selling lemonade. This woman drove up and started yelling at him for no reason. She threatened to call the police if he didn't leave. He never raised his voice or did anything threatening. He gave the police an imploring look, hoping they would understand the subtext of what had just happened." Spoke up next, her old voice cracking with the stress of public speaking. Yes, the boy was polite. He's been selling lemonade on weekends for a few weeks now. I've bought some myself." Nothing illegal about a young entrepreneur, right? Her gentle face crinkled in concern, hoping she could somehow diffuse the situation. Shot them both with a look of pure contempt. "You're taking his side. Are you serious? This is about keeping the neighborhood standards intact. I wouldn't let some random child, any child, set up shop outside my home like this." But the way she said, "any child," landed with a bitter resonance that made it hard for anyone to believe her claim was unbiased. The female officer, who introduced herself as Officer Rhodes, approached the table. She glanced at the plastic cups, the pitcher, and the neon sign. "Is this your stand, kid?" she asked gently. Josh nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to earn some money for basketball. It was never my intention to, break the law." He spoke quietly, trying to maintain some composure. Officer Rhodes gave him a small, reassuring smile. "It's usually not a big issue for kids to run lemonade stands, but sometimes there are city codes about where you can set up. Typically, you might need a permit if you're on public property, but that's usually for larger operations or blocking traffic." She paused, looking around. "You're not blocking the street or sidewalk in a significant way. As far as I can see, you're not causing any real hazard. Most folks let kids do their thing, as long as they're not being a disturbance." "Ma'am," she turned to, "did you specifically feel threatened, or was this more about the stand itself?" Bristled, adjusting her sunglasses in a flurry of annoyance. She realized that so far the officers weren't taking her side. "He's loitering, soliciting on my block. He doesn't belong here. His parents aren't supervising. It's unacceptable." Caroline's face stiffened at the insinuation that her child didn't belong. She tightened her arm around Josh protectively. "We live right here," she said, pointing at the modest house where she had come from. "This is our block, too. My son is supervised. I was just inside with my baby. He's been out here for less than an hour. Hardly a threat to anybody, except maybe to the notion that kids aren't allowed to have harmless fun." Huffed. "A child left unattended could be a threat to himself. The neighbors, there's traffic, anything could happen. I'm looking out for everyone's safety." As the officers listened, more onlookers gathered at a distance, some quietly filming with their phones. The severity of calling the police on a young black boy for a lemonade stand was not lost on them. They recorded the incident, aware that such calls could end tragically if the officers believed the woman's account and saw the child as a legitimate threat. Thankfully, the presence of multiple bystanders, all testifying to the boy's calm demeanor, seemed to have neutralized the initial suspicion. Officer Rhodes exchanged a look with her partner, Officer Manning. Manning's lips were pressed into a thin line as he spoke. "Ma'am," he addressed, "I can see how you might have concerns if you believed there was a violation. However, from what we can gather, this is just a typical neighborhood lemonade stand. We don't see any grounds for a criminal complaint here." Opened her mouth to protest, but Manning's raised hand stopped her. "If you'd like to file a formal complaint with the city about operating without a permit, that's a separate civil matter." But right now, there's no emergency. This doesn't warrant police action. That should have ended things, but seemingly unwilling to let go of her righteous fury, pressed on. He's not from around here, she insisted, even though Caroline had just stated they lived right around the corner. I don't understand why you won't do anything. I pay taxes for the police to protect us. She spat the last word with such venom that it was obvious she was using us in a very specific way. Caroline tensed, and her eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed. This is our home, she repeated softly. I've lived here for years. My son has grown up here, and what you're doing is harassment. Snorted in contempt. Don't play the victim here, lady. She took a step closer to Caroline, but the look on Caroline's face made her halt. There was a quiet strength there, a mother's protective fury that brooked no challenge. Officer Rhodes broke in, her tone gentle but firm. That's enough, everyone. Let's all calm down. Is there any chance you can move the stand a bit so it's not directly on the sidewalk, just to avoid blocking pedestrians? That might help. Caroline looked at Josh, who nodded. He was willing to cooperate if it meant diffusing the situation. Sure, he murmured. I can move it onto our driveway, I guess. Sniffed, he shouldn't be allowed to sell at all, she muttered under her breath. But the officers appeared to ignore that, turning instead to Caroline and Josh. That would be best, Officer Rhodes said with a polite nod. As they repositioned the stand onto the edge of their driveway, the neighbors drifted away, muttering quiet words of empathy or disbelief. Lingered, her arms folded, mouth twisted in dissatisfaction. She had failed to achieve her dramatic takedown, and she seemed unsure how to continue her vendetta. For a moment, it looked like she would launch another tirade. But perhaps the sight of all those phones aimed in her direction, the unwavering presence of the officers, and the stoic protective stance of Caroline gave her pause. Finally, she scoffed, flipping her hair in an exaggerated gesture, and stomped back to her sedan. She threw the door open, revved the engine, and sped away, leaving behind a fading trail of exhaust and tension. Everyone on the street watched the vehicle go, relief mingled with residual shock. The police took a few more minutes to conclude, giving Caroline instructions about local ordinances. They told her that in most cases, kids' lemonade stands were overlooked by law enforcement unless there were severe health or safety violations, which obviously did not apply here. Then they drove off, probably grateful that the incident hadn't turned into anything worse. Caroline turned to Josh, her eyes brimming with love and worry. She took his hand, leading him onto the front lawn. The plastic table, cups, and pitcher rattled in the breeze. The baby whimpered again, rubbing her tiny fists against her eyes. Josh, tears now escaping his control, quietly sobbed. Caroline knelt down beside him, hugging him carefully with her free arm. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry this happened. He nodded, burying his face against her shoulder. For a long time, the two of them remained like that, mother and son locked in a silent embrace, as though trying to shield each other from a world that could be so cruel for no reason. Eventually, Miss approached hesitantly, placing a gentle hand on Caroline's shoulder. I'm sorry for that woman's behavior, she said, her voice trembling with sympathy. I wish I had confronted her sooner. Oh, Caroline gave her a small, grateful smile. Thank you, she said softly. Thank you for speaking up at all. Nodded, looking as if she carried the weight of many years, understanding all too well the pain that prejudice could cause. Mr. also stepped forward, handing Josh a few dollar bills. You keep that dream alive, buddy, he said. Put this toward your basketball, and if you need a place to set up your stand, you can use my front yard anytime you want. Touched by the gesture, Josh managed a watery smile. Thanks, Mr. G, he whispered, his voice still choking with emotion. The new couple and Roger offered an encouraging wave, letting Josh know they were on his side too. It was a small comfort, a reminder that not everyone in the neighborhood felt like did, but the pain remained. It was the hurt of being singled out, threatened, for doing something innocent and normal, all because of skin color. Even at his young age, Josh understood that much. He'd heard his parents talk about bigotry, about prejudice that simmered below the surface in places one might not expect. Yet experiencing it firsthand was a different matter entirely, a harsh lesson that bruised his trust in the fundamental kindness of others. Caroline guided Josh inside, and they both collapsed onto the living room couch. She set the baby in a small playpen, gently rocking it to keep her calm. Then she turned her full attention to her son, brushing the tears from his cheeks. Sweetie, are you okay? Her words were soft, but her voice shook. She yearned to take his pain away. Josh shrugged, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. I guess so, he said quietly. It's just not fair. All I wanted was to get a basketball. I didn't do anything wrong. Oh, you didn't, Caroline agreed, pulling him close. You did absolutely nothing wrong. Some people have hate in their hearts. They'll look for any reason to lash out. And sometimes they don't even realize how hateful they really are. We can't let them control our lives, though. You still have every right to follow your dreams. Josh leaned against his mother, comforted by her warmth. But the sadness lingered, a heavy stone in his chest. What if she comes back? He asked. The possibility chilled him. Caroline's expression hardened. If she does, we'll handle it. You're not alone, Josh. We have neighbors who support us. We have the law on our side, and I promise you, your father and I will do everything we can to keep you safe. She stroked his hair, trying to instill in him the confidence he deserved to have. He sighed, nodding. For the first time all day, he felt a spark of relief, yet the damage had been done. He understood that something about him, his blackness, had fueled his rage, and that knowledge was a bruise on his heart, one that wouldn't simply fade overnight. Caroline placed a kiss on his forehead, and together they sat in silence for a while, letting the tension seep out of their bodies. Evening descended on the neighborhood. The sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in dramatic pinks and oranges. Caroline watched from the window as a few more neighbors walked by, looking toward the driveway where Josh's stand had been. Some paused, seeming to check that everything was calm. Caroline saw the hush that had settled over the street, like a collective intake of breath, as though everyone was waiting to see if the day's conflict might flare up again. But for now, his house remained dark. It appeared that she had left, or at least chosen to stay indoors, perhaps fuming over how the police had not vindicated her complaints. At the dinner table, Josh poked at his food without appetite. His father, Mark, who had been at work that day, listened in growing disbelief as Caroline and Josh recounted the afternoon's events. Mark's face hardened with anger, but he kept his voice calm for Josh's sake. "We've talked about these things, buddy," he said softly, "but I never wanted you to have to experience them so soon. Some people will see the color of your skin and think the worst. It's not right, and I'm sorry." "Oh." Josh nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "What if she tries something else? She said we don't belong here, but we do, right? This is our home." Mark reached across the table to grasp his son's hand. "Absolutely. We belong here just as much as anyone else. Nobody gets to tell you otherwise." He gave Josh's hand a firm squeeze. After dinner, they put on a movie for Josh, hoping to distract him. But the images on screen barely registered in his mind, overshadowed by the memory of scornful face. Eventually, he fell into a restless sleep. Caroline and Mark tucked him in, exchanging worried glances. The day had shaken them too, dredging up fears for their children's safety in a world that sometimes refused to treat them fairly. In the days that followed, word of the incident spread through the neighborhood. Some neighbors offered quiet support. Friendly waves, a few extra dollars whenever Josh set up his lemonade stand in the driveway, even small gifts for him to show they cared. Others, who might have sympathized with, or simply didn't want to get involved, remained silent. A subtle rift seemed to form in the community, though most folks leaned toward supporting Josh. After all, the boy was sweet, respectful, and his lemonade was actually pretty good, too sour for some tastes, but always refreshing in the summer heat. For her part was rarely seen. Her blinds stayed drawn. When she did venture out, usually to the grocery store, she hurried to her car with her head bowed, ignoring the stares and whispers around her. People realized the story had traveled well beyond the confines of their little street. Some of those phone recordings had made it onto social media. The local news station even ran a brief segment about a racist altercation in the suburbs, featuring a grainy clip of calling the police. Most watchers could glean the basic facts: a black boy, a lemonade stand, an out-of-proportion 911 call. The public reaction was overwhelmingly in Josh's favor, and it was rumored that had received threatening messages online. Josh, feeling confused by all the attention, tried to continue as normal. He returned to selling lemonade in a more discreet capacity, just a couple days after that fiasco. He set up on the driveway as Officer Rhodes had suggested, and a surprising number of neighbors dropped by to purchase a cup. Some said encouraging words, others just smiled. Within a week, he had earned enough for his new basketball, and he even had some money left over for school supplies. yet the uneasy awareness that not everyone saw him as just a harmless kid in search of pocket change lingered in his mind. One sunny morning, about a week after the confrontation, the doorbell rang. Caroline answered to find a man in an official-looking uniform standing on the porch. He introduced himself as from the city's licensing department. She felt her heart plummet. Was this more trouble? "I'm sorry to bother you," said quickly, glancing down at a clipboard. He was a middle-aged man with worry lines etched into his forehead, though he smiled kindly. "We received an official complaint about an unlicensed vendor operating at this address. I wanted to come by and see if we could clarify the situation." His eyes darted over to the driveway, where the small lemonade table was folded up against the garage door. Caroline sighed, feeling a mix of annoyance and resignation. "Yes, my son's been selling lemonade occasionally. Is that really an issue that warrants the city's attention?" Hesitated, looking almost embarrassed. "Normally, no. In fact, we rarely enforce these minor regulations against kids, but if someone files a formal complaint, we have to follow up, at least on paper." He scratched his head, then looked directly at Caroline. "You see, the person who filed the complaint said there were health concerns. Specifically, they claim your son's lemonade might be unclean, and that he's distributing it to the public without a proper permit." Oh. Caroline pursed her lips, anger flaring inside her. It was obviously stewing. Determined not to back down, she straightened her shoulders. "We take cleanliness seriously. We use clean pitchers, fresh lemons, bottled water. It's a small, family-supervised stand. He's not running a restaurant." Nodded apologetically. "I understand, ma'am. Believe me, I'm sure everything is fine, but I'm obligated to give you this." He handed her a small brochure that explained the local ordinances for food vendors, along with an application form. "Technically, if you're operating for profit and offering consumable products to the public, you're supposed to get a health permit. But off the record, we rarely see that enforced for lemonade stands. However, this complaint forces us to follow the process." Caroline took the papers, her chest tight with frustration. "So what now?" she asked. "Well, said, you can apply for the permit if you plan to keep it up regularly, or you can limit this to just a private, non-commercial activity, like a yard sale approach, where it's clear you're not heavily promoting it." He shrugged apologetically. "I hate to trouble you with bureaucracy, ma'am, but if this complaint is on file, my office has to close it out properly. Someone's pushing the issue." Caroline nodded, controlling her temper. "I understand. It's not your fault. Thank you for being straightforward." Smiled, relieved she wasn't yelling at him, and excused himself. As he walked back to his car, Caroline felt her hands shaking with suppressed anger. Even after the public backlash to her 911 call, was finding new ways to harass them, using bureaucratic channels to block Josh's stand. That evening, Caroline and Mark sat on the couch, the complaint papers spread across the coffee table. Josh was in his room, reading comic books, blissfully unaware that more trouble was brewing. "I could apply for the permit," Caroline said quietly, "but it'll cost us money and time. And it's ridiculous, he's just a kid. This is all because she can't stand to see him having fun." Mark exhaled heavily. "I suspect this is about more than that. She probably wants to prove a point that she has power. Maybe she's trying to incite us to break a rule or lose our temper so we look like the bad guys. I don't know." He picked up the application, scanning it. "We'd have to submit a health inspection form, register as a food vendor. It's so excessive." Caroline rubbed her temples, feeling a headache forming. "Maybe we should just stop the lemonade stand altogether. I hate giving her the satisfaction, but I also hate this stress." Mark set the papers down. "Let's talk to Josh. He might be okay with giving it a rest. He has enough for his basketball now. Maybe it's not worth continuing, but if he wants to fight this," he trailed off. Caroline understood what he meant. If this was truly about a bigger principle, standing up to racism and intimidation, they might consider pushing back. But was it fair to put that burden on their 10-year-old son? They decided to ask Josh in a gentle way, presenting the facts: the complaint, the permit process, the possibility of harassment. Josh sat quietly, absorbing their words with a gravity that seemed too heavy for a child. Finally, he looked up, eyes determined. "I don't want to give up," he said. "It's not fair. She shouldn't get to decide what I can or can't do. I'll move the stand wherever, I'll keep it super clean, but I don't want to quit because of her." He paused, lips quivering. "Is that okay?" Caroline and Mark exchanged a look of pride mixed with worry. It's absolutely okay, Caroline said, pulling him into a hug. We'll help you. We'll fill out the permit paperwork and do everything by the book. Then she can't say a thing, but it might take some time and money. Josh nodded, swallowing hard. I'll use the money from the stand to help pay for it, he offered. I know it's not a lot, but… Mark ruffled his son's hair. Hey, you let us take care of the fees. You just keep being the brave, determined kid we know you are. And so they started the bureaucratic journey. Caroline made calls to the health department, arranged for an inspector to come check their setup, and filled out the forms with painstaking accuracy. It was an absurd process for a simple lemonade stand, but they persisted. Word got around the neighborhood that the family was seeking to legitimize the stand, and a wave of support rolled in. Some neighbors offered to testify to the cleanliness and the safety of the stand. Others promised to donate small sums to cover fees. Even local activists caught wind of the story, offering to organize a neighborhood event to raise awareness about overpolicing of black children and microaggressions in supposedly liberal suburbs. At first, the attention made Caroline uneasy. She didn't want her son's childhood pastime to become a political, but she also recognized the bigger picture. How easily the system could be manipulated by someone like to harass a family who was just trying to go about their lives. If shining a spotlight on the issue helped prevent future incidents, maybe it was worth it. Josh felt a surge of confidence from the outpouring of community support. When the health inspector arrived, a friendly older man named Josh proudly showed him the pitcher, the sealed containers of sugar, the fresh lemons, the cooler filled with ice packs to keep everything cold. Nodded approvingly, asked a few basic questions, then gave them a short lecture on food safety. Less than half an hour later, they had a green light. All that remained was waiting for the official permit from City Hall. During this wait, his presence loomed like a dark shadow over the neighborhood, even though she rarely emerged from her house. Some neighbors suspected she was too embarrassed after the media coverage to show her face. Others thought she was merely biding her time until she found another angle to pursue. At night, Josh sometimes imagined her peering through her curtains, seething with rage that her attempts to oust him had only his stand's popularity. One morning, about a week into the permit process, a surprise arrived in their mailbox, a letter from an attorney representing. The letter alleged that Josh was causing excessive noise and traffic on her street corner, obstructing her peaceful enjoyment of her property. It demanded that he cease his operations immediately or face a potential lawsuit. Caroline stared at the letter in disbelief, her pulse pounding. Was this real? A lawsuit threat over a lemonade stand? Her eyes drifted to the bottom of the page, scanning the attorney's signature. She recognized the address as a local law office. This was no bluff. Shaking with frustration, she stormed into the living room where Mark was folding laundry. Look at this, she hissed, handing him the letter. He read it, his expression darkening. She's really escalating this, huh? He murmured, rubbing the back of his neck. Over a lemonade stand, she's going to these lengths. Caroline exhaled sharply, trying to steady herself. Yeah, I guess the police and city complaints weren't enough for her. Now she's threatening legal action. This is insane. She's targeting our child. Mark set the letter down, determination flaring in his eyes. We'll call the attorney who helped us with the mortgage paperwork, see if she has any recommendations. We aren't going to let bully us into shutting down. This is about principle now. She can't just use the legal system as a weapon to maintain her racist illusions. They called their lawyer, a woman named, who listened with palpable astonishment. A lawsuit over a child's lemonade stand, said over the phone, her voice rising. Well, it's not unprecedented, but it's outrageous. I'll draft a response. We'll defend you if it comes to that. But my guess is this is just a scare tactic. She explained that would have a hard time proving real damages, noise, traffic, or otherwise, and the court would likely throw out such a frivolous complaint. But keep documenting everything, advised. If she escalates further, we'll want a record of your compliance with all city regulations, plus the harassment you've endured. The possibility of a legal battle hung over the household like a storm cloud, but they pressed on. They completed the permit process, receiving an official document from the city that authorized a minor limited food distribution stand on private property, effective for the summer. The day Caroline pinned the permit to a small bulletin board beside Josh's stand, a wave of relief and triumph washed through her. We're legit, she said, hugging her son. Now if she complains to the city again, We have all our paperwork in order." Josh beamed, proud of the official-looking certificate. He placed it on the table for all to see, next to the little tip jar. Over the following days, business boomed. Friends from school, neighbors from different streets, even curious folks who had seen the viral videos online stopped by. They paid 50 cents or more for a cup of lemonade, snapped pictures with Josh, and thanked him for standing up for himself. Some told him he was an inspiration to other kids who had faced racism. He listened with a mixture of gratitude and a bit of embarrassment. He never set out to be a symbol of anything, he just wanted to buy a basketball. But if his stand could be a reminder that prejudice could be confronted, then maybe it was worthwhile. Yet behind the flurry of support, an undercurrent of anxiety persisted. Caroline and Mark feared another sudden eruption from. They worried about what form it might take. Then, late one afternoon, it happened. A furious pounding on the door shattered the dinner-time calm. Mark answered, only to find on the porch, eyes wild with rage. It was the first time she had appeared in person since the 911 call. A tense hush fell over the household as Caroline and Josh peeked around the corner. "What the hell is going on?" screeched, brandishing a piece of paper in Mark's face. "You told the city I was harassing you. That I was making false complaints. Now they're threatening to fine me for filing a frivolous report. This is your fault." Mark raised his eyebrows, refusing to be rattled. "You called the police on our son for selling lemonade," he reminded her calmly, though his heart pounded. "You filed official complaints about a minor stand, forcing us to spend time and money to comply with the city. We documented all of it. The city is simply responding to the evidence." She stomped her foot, her voice taking on that shrill edge again. "You didn't have to blow this up in the media. I'm getting harassed by strangers online, threatened. This has gone too far." Mark let out a mirthless chuckle, and calling 911 on a child wasn't too far, he asked evenly. "Harassing us with lawsuits, city complaints, telling the neighborhood he's a threat, none of that was too far. You made a choice to escalate. You can't blame us for defending ourselves." She spluttered, scanning his face as if searching for a crack in his composure. When her gaze flicked to Caroline, who had stepped forward protectively, and then to Josh, who stood just behind his mother, her expression twisted in raw loathing. "You people," she hissed, choking on her own words, her voice trembling with a quiet fury that stank of the prejudice she no longer bothered to mask. "You ruin everything you touch. My life was peaceful until you moved here." Caroline's body went rigid, every muscle tensed with fury. She fought the urge to scream back, remembering the priority was to keep her family safe. "We've been here for years," she said coldly. "You don't own this neighborhood." A sneer curled his lips. "No, but I know who belongs and who doesn't." She clenched the paper in her hand, likely a notice from the city, and flung it at Mark's feet. "I hope you're pleased with yourselves," she snarled. "All this over a stupid lemonade stand." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed off the porch. Mark watched her go, tension trembling in his clenched fists. Josh stood very still, absorbing the raw hatred in her words. She had basically said he didn't belong, that their presence itself was the problem. He felt tears sting his eyes, not from fear, but from a deep hurt. Caroline bent down, taking his hand in hers. She opened her mouth to comfort him, but for a moment, no words came. The kind of hate had exhibited was so blatant, so ugly, that it nearly robbed her of speech. Finally, Mark placed a hand on Josh's shoulder. "Don't listen to her," he said, voice low but unwavering. "She's letting hate control her. That has nothing to do with who you are. You hear me?" Josh sniffled, nodding. "Yes, Dad." His voice was small, yet there was an ember of determination within it. He would not let define him. He would not let her cruelty overshadow the support he had received. In the following days, talk of meltdown spread once more. Some neighbors whispered that she might be forced to move if the city issued serious fines, or if the harassment she was receiving online persisted. Others said she was just too proud to back down, that she would rather seethe behind closed doors than admit she was in the wrong. Meanwhile, Josh continued to sell lemonade from his driveway, now fully permitted and recognized by the city as a legitimate small-scale vendor. Each cup he sold seemed like an act of defiance against the hate that tried to silence him. The tension reached its peak on a sunny afternoon a few days later, when a group of local activists planned a Support Local Kid Entrepreneurs event, inviting children from all over town to bring their stands to the same street. The idea was that they would line the sidewalks and driveways with lemonade stands, cookie stands, and fruit stands, turning the block into a mini festival of youthful enterprise. It was a peaceful demonstration intended to celebrate diversity and highlight the ridiculousness of picking on a kid for trying to make a little money. When the day arrived, the streets were buzzing with excited chatter. At least a dozen children had come, accompanied by parents who helped them set up tables filled with homemade treats. On the sidewalk near Josh's house, a small banner reading "Kids for Unity" fluttered in the breeze. People from other neighborhoods showed up, drifting from table to table, sampling lemonade, brownies, and cupcakes. The entire block radiated a sense of community and celebration. Josh felt an electric thrill run through him as he set up his own stand, now proudly displaying the official permit taped to its front. He had decorated the table with balloons and placed his tip jar prominently near the pitcher. His parents looked on, smiling with pride. Caroline filmed with her phone, capturing the swirl of children, neighbors, and the cheerful hustle of the day. Music played from portable speakers, and someone had even brought in a bounce house, which squeaked with every jump. The local news van pulled up, cameras rolling. A reporter with a microphone approached, scanning the stands until she found Josh. She knelt down to his level, her expression warm and welcoming. "Hi, Josh. I'm from Channel 9 News. How does it feel to see all these people supporting you today?" Josh blushed, glancing at his mother for reassurance. Then he spoke softly into the microphone. "It's amazing. I never thought something so bad could turn into something so good. Everybody here is really nice." His voice quivered with a mixture of nerves and excitement. He felt proud to be part of something that brought people together. Nodded, smiling. "That's wonderful, Josh. What do you hope people take away from this event?" Josh paused, considering his words. "I hope they learn that, even if some people don't like you or judge you because of how you look, you can still do good things. And there are always people who will stand by you." Blinked, moved by the simple yet profound statement. "Thank you, Josh," she said softly. "You're a wise young man." She stood up, signaled to her cameraman to pan across the scene. All around them, laughter and chatter created a festive atmosphere. Children swapped cups of lemonade and cookies, parents exchanged phone numbers, and congratulated each other on their kids' entrepreneurial spirit. The activism group that had orchestrated the event handed out small flyers about combating prejudice in local communities. The general mood was joyful and supportive. It was in this moment of communal celebration that the crowd suddenly fell silent. People turned their heads in one direction, and Josh, still chatting with a neighbor, followed their gaze. Standing at the end of the street, partially hidden behind a tall hedge, she appeared disheveled, her eyes sunken, her expression hollow. She made no move to approach. Instead, she stood like a ghost at the perimeter of the party, as though haunted by the sight of the children and families having fun. For a moment, she and Josh locked eyes. Fear threatened to slither into his chest, but he refused to let it. He simply stared back, calm and resolute, glanced around, presumably aware of the stares from the crowd. The tension crackled like electricity. For a split second, it looked like she might storm forward and unleash another tirade. But maybe she saw the line of children, the parents, the cameras from the news station. Or maybe she felt the heavy pressure of her own guilt, the knowledge that she had turned herself into a villain. Whatever the reason, her shoulders sagged, and she turned away, disappearing back behind the hedge. A collective exhale passed through the crowd. The festivities resumed, albeit with a lingering edge of unease. As the day wound down, the stands closed up one by one, with the children eagerly counting their earnings. The bounce house deflated. Families began to gather their supplies, chatting about what a wonderful event it had been. Josh's tip jar was brimming with coins and bills, far more than he expected. He suspected many had overpaid for lemonade out of solidarity, but he felt grateful all the same. Caroline and Mark helped him pack up, and once everything was loaded into the garage, the street returned to a quieter state. The activists congratulated each other and departed. The neighbors retreated into their homes, satisfied after the day's celebration. All that remained was a subtle stillness, the hushed memory of laughter and unity echoing in the late afternoon air. Josh stood on the driveway, gazing at the sky turning shades of purple and pink. He clutched his new basketball in one hand, the bouncing orange sphere that had started this all. So much had happened in such a short span of time, and he felt older somehow, like he had learned lessons that most kids his age had yet to face. He turned to see his parents smiling at him, pride in their eyes. "You did good, kid," Mark said, ruffling Josh's hair. Caroline placed a hand on Josh's shoulder. "We're proud of you for standing up for yourself and for not letting hate stop you from doing what you love. You showed a lot of courage." Josh gazed at the spot where had stood, recalling the angry twist of her features. Even with the permit, the supportive neighbors, and the successful event, he realized the existence of people like her wouldn't just vanish. There might always be those who saw him as less, who wanted to cut him down. But in the face of that, he had found a community of people who cared, and the experience had ignited a spark of confidence and empathy within him. He dribbled the basketball on the pavement, the sharp rhythm echoing across the empty street. "I'm not scared of her anymore," he said quietly. "I just feel bad for her. She's missing out on all this." He gestured to the echoes of the festivities, the sense of neighborly love that still lingered, intangible but real. Caroline's eyes brimmed with tears. "That's an incredibly compassionate thought, Josh," she whispered, leaning down to hug him tightly. "And you're right, hate eats people from the inside out." Mark stepped closer, hugging them both. They stood like that, a small family in a big world, intimately aware of life's injustices, but also deeply cognizant of its capacity for hope and unity. In that shared embrace, Josh felt not just the warmth of his parents, but the collective goodwill of everyone who had shown up that day, everyone who had said no to prejudice and yes to love. Nightfall cloaked the neighborhood in tranquility. Josh eventually went inside to shower, his limbs exhausted from the day's excitement. He felt his eyes drooping even as he dried his hair with a towel. In his room, he placed the new basketball on a shelf where he could see it, letting it serve as a reminder that no dream, no matter how small, should be snuffed out by ignorance or spite. He noticed the wad of bills he had collected, a tangible sign of support and solidarity. Smiling, he tucked them into a jar he kept for savings. Downstairs, Caroline and Mark up and talked quietly about the future. There might still be hurdles, could continue her harassment, or try new legal angles, but they knew now that they weren't alone. The kindness of neighbors and strangers alike had transformed their fear into a steely resolve. And more than that, they had watched their son grow in courage, refusing to let bigotry define him or limit his aspirations. Later that night, as Josh lay in bed, his mind wandered over the events of the past weeks. He recalled the moment's car screeched to a halt, the disbelief of having police show up at his lemonade stand, the tears that clouded his vision when he realized her hatred was aimed directly at him because of his race. That memory clutched at his heart, but then he remembered everything that followed: the unwavering support of his parents, the neighbors stepping forward to defend him, the day-long festival of kids selling lemonade and snacks in solidarity. A sense of triumph overrode the fear. He drifted off to sleep wearing a faint smile. Weeks turned into months. The story of the racist 911 call on a black boy selling lemonade remained a local legend, occasionally referenced in news stories about racial profiling and prejudice. His fury gradually faded from everyday conversation, though she remained in the house down the street. Sometimes, people saw her scowling through a crack in the curtains. She no longer confronted Josh or anyone else publicly, presumably battered by the social and potential legal consequences of her actions. Meanwhile, Josh continued to sell lemonade occasionally, though with the changing seasons, business slowed. In the cooler autumn air, he might set up a small hot cocoa stand instead, or simply find new ways to channel his entrepreneurial spirit. Each time he did, he felt a sense of pride. The stand wasn't just a stand anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that he was capable of standing up for himself and for others who might be treated unfairly. He took his new basketball to the local courts, practicing free throws and dribbling drills with a diligence born from his conviction that good things could come from adversity. He became a familiar face at the park, often shooting hoops with kids of all ages. Sometimes strangers recognized him. "Hey, aren't you that lemonade stand kid from the news?" they'd ask. Josh would blush and nod, still unused to the attention, but it no longer frightened him. It reminded him that one small act of standing up for what's right could reverberate far beyond what anyone expected. Caroline and Mark watched him blossom, grateful that the frightening encounter with racism had not crushed his spirit, but rather forged it stronger. They continued to guide him, explaining the realities of the world in a way that was honest yet instilled hope. They taught him about civil rights heroes who had fought for justice, about how each generation carries forward the work of dismantling prejudice. They showed him books and documentaries, encouraging him to think critically and compassionately. He absorbed it all, his young mind expanding with a desire not only to protect himself, but to extend kindness to others who might face similar treatment. On a chilly fall afternoon, Josh ventured back to that very same corner where he'd first set up his lemonade stand, the corner near his house. He looked around at the now empty sidewalk, the leaves turning shades of gold and red, swirling across the pavement. A pang of memory hit him, a swirl of fear, anger, and ultimately resolve. In that moment, he set up a small table. This time, not for lemonade, but for a little community outreach project. He placed a sign that read, "Donate canned goods for the local food drive." It was a small gesture, a demonstration that he intended to use his platform, however modest, to spread positivity. Neighbors came by, dropping off cans of soup, vegetables, and jars of peanut butter. They smiled at Josh, praising his generosity. He beamed back, the corners of his eyes crinkling with genuine happiness. As dusk approached, a familiar beige sedan slowly rolled down the street. Josh recognized it instantly as car. His heart gave a slight flutter, but he steadied himself. The car came to a stop at the curb, idling as though its driver were contemplating whether to confront him. For a heart-stopping moment, Josh locked eyes with through the windshield. Her face was cast in partial shadow, making her expression unreadable. Josh braced for the worst. But then she shifted her gaze away, put the car back in gear, and drove off, leaving only a cold hush in her wake. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The tension of that moment felt like a final test. She had chosen not to lash out, perhaps because she knew how it would end, or maybe because some part of her recognized the futility of her hatred. Josh watched the sedan disappear down the street, feeling both relief and a touch of sorrow. As he looked at the pile of canned goods on the table, he felt a surge of gratitude. The neighbors had shown up again, and he had persevered. The standoff hadn't simply been about a lemonade stand. It was about belonging, dignity, the right to exist and dream without fear. It was a wound in his childhood, but one that had healed into a scar of strength rather than bitterness. That evening, he and his parents delivered the canned goods to the local food bank. The staff there thanked them, praising Josh's initiative. He realized that, in a strange way, the ordeal had spurred him to become more community-minded. He saw how easily hate could tear people apart, and he wanted to be a force that brought them together, through a cup of lemonade, a donation drive, or just a friendly smile. Time flowed on, but the echoes of that day, when the police were called on a child for the simple act of selling lemonade, never fully vanished. Folks in the neighborhood still talked about it occasionally, usually as a cautionary tale or a rallying cry. New families who moved in would hear the story, and they'd greet Josh kindly, praising his bravery. Every once in a while, a stranger passing through would recognize him, offering a few words of support. Josh learned to handle these interactions with grace, neither reveling in nor resenting his brief local fame. And she remained a distant figure, a specter more than a real presence. Sometimes, on quiet walks home from school, Josh would glimpse her collecting her mail or watering a wilted plant on her porch. She would look up, see him, and freeze. Then, with a jerk of her head, she'd hurry inside. Whenever this happened, Josh felt a strange mix of pity and remembrance of the fear she had inflicted, but he let it pass. He had other priorities: family, friends, sports, and a life that brimmed with possibilities. He resolved never to shrink himself to fit someone else's hateful expectations. In the end, the transformation of that bleak incident into a story of solidarity became a touchstone, not just for Josh, but for the community around him. They realized how a single hateful act could spark a groundswell of kindness. They also saw how easy it was for prejudice to slip into everyday life if left unchecked. The lasting impact was a neighborhood that grew, more aware of each other's struggles, and more prepared to stand together against those who sought to harm the vulnerable. And for Josh, though he would never forget the sting of cruelty, he also discovered an enduring sense of empowerment. In his darkest moment, he had found the light of collective support. He learned that even one small voice of defiance, like that of a 10-year-old boy with a lemonade stand, could echo far beyond its source. The incident became a stepping stone, shaping him into a young person who understood that courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to act despite it. So every summer thereafter, if you wandered down that suburban street, you might find a bright, colorful table set up in the driveway. You'd see hand-painted signs advertising lemonade or cookies, or whichever treat Josh felt like selling that season. You'd see neighbors gathered around in conversation, the soft hum of community weaving through the air. And if you asked about the origins of that cheerful stand, you'd be told a tale of how it once sparked a clash of hate and empathy. You'd hear how a woman tried to call the police on a black boy for daring to dream of buying a basketball. And you'd learn how that boy, through resilience and the support of those who cared, turned a weapon of prejudice into a platform for unity. With each cup of lemonade he poured, he reminded the world that no one should be pushed aside for being who they are, and that sometimes the simplest acts of innocence can stand tall against the roar of intolerance.